The British retail consortium Pearce Retail Employment Monitor has just produced its latest report on the health of employment in British retail. The report, which is published quarterly, compares job numbers to a year ago and outlines retailers' plans to recruit new staff. Well, in order to understand the significance of the report, I spoke to its authors. Christina Tolvers-Vincent is Head of Retail Employment at law firm Pearce. Stephen Robertson is Director General of the British Retail Consortium, and Gavin Matthews is a retail law specialist also with Pearce. And I asked them first of all to outline the headlines in the report.
Well, we've seen relatively modest growth in retail employment over the last quarter, but at least it's growth. And what I think is the most significant thing about the report is that the retail industry continues to outperform the overall economy when it comes to employment.
The key headline for me is in terms of retailers' employment intentions for the future, with the percentage of retailers who are anticipating having to make job cuts having gone up to just over a third. But there's also a stark difference between the food and non-food retailers, where the food retailers are still anticipating recruiting a significant number of staff over the next few years.
Well, what we've seen in the last quarter is a modest 0.6% increase in the number of jobs in retail. But when you look a little behind those numbers, you can see that the food sector has fared a lot better than non-food. But also on a monthly basis, we can see at the beginning of the quarter in October, there was some strong growth, 2% growth in jobs. But by December, that was turned into a negative of a drop of about 1.5% in jobs. So we're quite worried that we're seeing some signs of a slowdown.
Well, I think you'll agree, some very interesting trends coming out of that report about the ongoing resilience of retailers in the face of increasingly difficult economic circumstances. But I then went on to speak to Stephen Robertson, specifically about why retail continues to hold its own when compared to other sectors.
Well, we've seen some real resilience from the retail sector. About 6 months after the Lehman crash, we saw growth returning, very modest growth, but growth nonetheless. And the reason for that, I think, is twofold. Firstly, continuing belief and investment in the sector, and that's most clearly evident in new shops growing, new square footage. But also, I think that there's been a very quick response from retail to the new mood in the nation. And we've seen a difference in offers, hugely competitive pricing, a growth in promotions, and just deals and offers in store that have meant that customers have continued to come into the shops.
I also asked Stephen how long he thought this growth could be sustained and what factors would impact on it.
Well, we've already seen signs of a slowdown in the sales numbers and employment numbers at the tail end of 2010. I'm fearful of performance during this year. I think it's going to be economically a very difficult year for consumers and businesses alike. Critical in this, of course, is what the Chancellor decides to do in his budget. We must avoid any more burdens on retail. I'm thinking particularly here of major increases in national minimum wage, major increases in rates or increases in national insurance, and anything that, of course, that undermines confidence from the consumer. So I think there's every reason to believe we won't have a double dip, but frankly I think it's going to be a very low or maybe no growth year for retail.
Well, we'll all be watching with great interest to see whether this period of growth continues. I then asked Gavin Matthews and Christina Tolvers-Vincent to explain what dangers and challenges there might be ahead for British retailers.
Well, I think the main challenge for retailers is the increase in VAT, the effect of which we won't know for some time, the increase in inflation. But I think that the main question really is how far retailers and the private sector generally can absorb the cuts that have been made in the public sector.
One of the key challenges for retailers is the volume of regulation, and there's certainly been no sign of reduction in regulation as of yet. On the employment law side, we've still got more regulation to come with increase in paternity leave rights and agency workers regulations. In terms of the abolition of the default retirement age, which is worrying a lot of employers at the moment, I think retailers will find it a little bit easier because a number of the large retailers have already abolished retirement ages many years ago. So that's a positive for the employers in the retail sector. But they'll still face challenges in terms of the volume of employment tribunal litigation, which keeps going up and up.
Well, some points there that retailers will want to keep a close eye on. I also wanted to know the role they felt retail plays in the UK economy of today and in the future. I asked Gavin and Stephen to explain.
Well, the retail industry is a major employer in the UK. I think that the greatest role it's got to play is in helping to tackle youth unemployment. We've recently seen figures of nearly 1 million for youth unemployment. And bearing in mind that a third of employees in the retail industry are under the age of 25, any increase in retail employment must be good news for younger job seekers.
Well, the retail sector is absolutely pivotal in the UK economy. First and foremost, it's 8% of added value GDP in the UK, but more particularly, it's the biggest single private sector employer, and that's 3 million jobs. 1 in every 10 jobs are in retail.
Some food for thought there. And finally, I asked all the report's authors what they expect to see happen in the next 6 to 12 months in UK retail.
Well, I think we're in for a relatively bumpy ride for retailers. I expect to see over the next 2 quarters relatively flat figures for retail employment in line with a challenging, tough economic climate.
I think it's difficult to foresee what will happen over the next 6 to 12 months. We're yet to see the impact of the public sector cuts on the retail sector. I think what we can say is that it will be a challenging time. But on a positive note, the supermarkets have all indicated an intention to recruit many more employees over the next few years. So that will be a positive. But what we will see is a bit of a change in terms of employment patterns, because whilst the number of new stores are being opened, they tend to be smaller, and therefore, whilst the number of employees has been going up in the retail sector, the average number of employees per store has been going down.
Well, most chief executives in retail are telling me they're expecting a difficult year. There are lots of headwinds in the economy, both for businesses and for consumers. So I expect it to be tough. Now, obviously, some businesses will fare better than others, but in terms of major subsectors, I can see that the level of inflation coming through means that we will have to see price increases beyond the VAT increase that we've just experienced, and that is obviously going to have an effect on sales volumes. Beyond that, I do see that retailers want to continue to invest in new space, and I expect that to continue, but there's no doubt about it, retailers have got their antennae up for any changes in the economy that suggest that we will have a more difficult time than we currently see. And I'm particularly looking at the Bank of England and how they handle interest rates to see whether we're going to have to put up with higher interest rate levels, which I think will significantly affect our ability to continue to build the sector.
The Retail Employment Monitor shows the importance of retail to the UK economy. In the recession, it was one of the few sectors to continue to create jobs rather than cut them. In order to continue to help drive economic recovery, it's clear from what we've heard today that no further burdens should be placed on retailers which might risk undermining their vital role in creating jobs.